Marcus Visionary on the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I tried to get you on actually last year. It was like right around this time. I made a trip to Toronto and our schedules just weren't able to line up. And I was like, oh, I'll get you next time. You know, I'll probably be back in a month or so.
Right.
And how things changed after that.
Oh my goodness. So what month was that?
That would have been like mid-February. It was around, right around this time.
Oh man, well.
That feels like a couple years ago now.
It does.
Yeah.
I mean, life ended in March, pretty much. You know, no more parties, no more gigs. Nothing.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I talked to a lot of musicians about this. I know you did a live stream the other night through. Was that through the TorontoJungle.com?
Yeah.
Through their page.
Yeah. For Rick Toxic and his crew, he does it with Lex and this guy named Rob EA. And they do it, and now they've launched Toronto Jungle as this massive brand. They've relaunched it, and it's not just a jungle brand anymore. It's just sort of their media company, and they're doing all sorts of different things. They got a professional studio, and their setup is unbelievable. They have moving cameras, and they've taken it to a whole other level. Every piece of gear you can imagine, they have it.
Wow, that's great. Yeah. I saw a lot of the reaction to your set. Actually, people love that era of drum and bass. I just don't think that there's such a powerful attachment to that era for those people that came up through it. I saw a lot of positive feedback on that set.
Yeah, it was, I mean, it's really funny because I can't remember the last time I started. I played about an hour and a half, almost 2 hours of 94, 95 stuff, just because there's such a massive resurgence for that and renaissance for that sound now. Those records are selling for like $100, sometimes $200 per record.
Yeah.
And so
Discogs is a evil place sometimes.
Oh, it's terrible. But so the jungle sound has come back full on, and guys are actually making that sound from that era now. Guys like Tim Reaper and Stretch has relaunched AKO. All the old jungle labels are back. Mark Ranger, he's brought back Kemet and Third Party and Redskins, and it's pretty exciting. Tom and Jerry's been re-releasing stuff.
Oh, really?
Mark Mack and Stretch have been making that happen. The great thing about my set that was really fun for me was I've been buying this Tom and Jerry stuff for the last year and a half that they've been re-releasing, and it's unreleased dubs, so it's new Tom and Jerry.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so people are listening, and I'm playing all this Tom and Jerry, and everyone's like, are these dub plates? Like, what?
Yeah, where'd you get that? Yeah. That's cool that they do that. But, I mean, would you pick them up just for the better sound quality? How are your, like, OGs holding up after all these years?
You know what? I don't batter the OGs. Like, I'm not playing them at home anymore, and it's, I'm bringing them out just for sets. And it's actually, I'm loving the repressing that's going on with all of the labels. I mean, there's a new label called Overshadow, and it's the Moving Shadow guys. Moving Shadow doesn't have anything to do with it, but all of the artists have come together, and they're going to re-release all their old dub plates from that period. Because the funny thing about the vinyl period back then was a lot of people were making music, but not everything went to vinyl.
No,
So sometimes they had like VIPs, special versions, Amen edits, little things just for their set. And so they've been digging those out, and obviously people have been hearing those in the rave packs and whatnot, and they want to get their hands on those. So, but for me, it's just getting those pressings and, not having to pay $200, dollars to get my hands on that,
to get your dub plates cut. Are you glad that era is completely gone? The dub plate cutting?
Funny enough, that set made me fall back in love with vinyl again.
Yeah. There's something about it. Just the feel that you get a Tech 12 under your hand once you've had that love for it. There's something about that. Definitely.
It's different like than digital, I've never actually played Serato with vinyl. So I could see the appeal for that as well, because you play differently. You roll things out differently,
Yeah.
And that music was made, I think, sometimes a minute and a half, 2 minute intros.
Yeah.
it was the sequence of it was completely different than today. Now it's like you've got like, you know, uh, not even a minute intro, and then you've got 64 bars, a breakdown, and then you're out.
Yeah,
Some
yeah.
songs they're like 3 minutes, 4 minute songs. Like back in the golden era, things were like 6, 7, 8 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean that was standard. You had to fill the side of the 12-inch, and that's just what it was going to be. But it, I guess, if it's on with the digital and the ability to sync, though, you can mix so much quicker as well, because it takes a lot of that, the art of beat matching and stuff out of it, which is, I know, is a whole thing in the DJ world. Like sync versus.
I think for me personally, I think I would be bored. Like if I ever had something that took beat matching out of it. But also for me, I don't find beat matching it's not a challenge anymore, because once you've learned how to do it, it's not a challenge. Like for the people that really have been doing this for a long time, it's not like, oh, I'm struggling to, and everybody makes mistakes because, I'll forget how a record is sequenced and whatnot. Like, the arrangement, these records are like 20, 30 years old, and I'm playing them for the first time in like some of them in a decade or 2 decades, so, but try not to be too hard on myself in that regard. But I mean, I think I always think about it. I'm like, wow, what if I wasn't actually beat matching? Like, what would be the joy? Because I really enjoy beat matching.
Yeah, I do
when
too.
I'm playing, it's almost like you're becoming part of it.
I think there's something
you're becoming part of the mix, right?
Yeah, I think the technology will allow more people to DJ and to be able to have that feel of doing it. And the ones who are really good will use the technology to take it somewhere new.
Right.
I think you see that in music quite a bit. But it's not the same. Yeah, there's definitely something different. So when you got into DJing, like I know that you started like you were there at the infancy of the rave scene in Toronto. But when you first start getting on a pair of turntables, what kind of music are you playing?
I was playing hip hop and electro and funk in the early days, but because I started playing in the 80s, I'm giving away my age. And
I'm up there too, Ren. Like I was born in the 70s, so it's all good.
Yeah, and I mean, I started playing when I was really young, and when I started showing an interest in music like when I was 6, 7 years old. And by the time I was 10, I was touching turntables because my friends across the street were older than me, and they were already deep into it. So it was about breakdancing and roller skating and DJing. These were the things you did in the early 80s. And, we were listening to like Africa Bambaataa and
of course, yeah.
Yeah. And, like Mantronic and Man Parrish, all these types of like electro, and then we were listening to a lot of funk. So we were listening to like George Clinton and Zapp, Roger Troutman, so it was a great time for music. That was the early electronic music as well. Like hip hop started out almost like with the techno feel,
Yeah, no, totally. African Bambaataa, like, is a perfect example. Is like the legendary example of that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that takes you probably into like the mid to late 80s, and then like house music starts to come into play a bit.
Yeah, so basically, I mean, by that time I was fully into it. Like, by the time I was, 13 or 14, all we were doing was DJing and, breakdancing and like, going to see Public Enemy and Run DMC in concert and going to, Ron Nelson would throw hip hop shows and we'd attend those. But then I started hearing the very first time I remember going to Carnival Records, which was the first shop I worked at and was one of the main shops for Toronto before Play the Record opened. And,
okay.
Yeah. And, Star Sound was up the street. And I remember seeing the first house records, and, this is like, I would say it was probably around 87 because I'd gotten this Chicago double pack compilation. But like we were hearing, as soon as things like that came out, we were getting it, so we were hearing like early like Chicago stuff and Detroit stuff, and
that was the importance of the record shop back then was everything.
Yeah,
that was the hub. That's what like you don't know. It's like I remember first getting into buying vinyl. It's like, it's literally well, that one looks cool. What does that sound like? But
Yeah.
then there's this, it opens so many doors once you discover that, and music that you can't find anywhere else either. I think Toronto was, I don't know if it was like that everywhere. Toronto seemed like it was just, right at the forefront of electronic music.
It was, like we had a great underground scene and club scene, like, discos. And, back then we had like, the Copa and Spectrum nightclub and Empire and all these little places that I used to go to. And they used to do all ages events. So I was partying,
Yeah.
by the time we were like 15 and 16, we were going to all ages events. And, RPM, which was the Gov, right? They were
Yeah.
doing all sorts. So Matt C was DJing and playing all ages events there. Chris Shepard started doing his thing, which ended up being kind of like the early part of rave, But basically, yes. So it started. I got into house music, but we were still heavily into hip hop at the time. I was DJ. I was actually a DJ for a rap group called R&R, and I guess the highlight of that was I played a show called Live at the Barbecue. DJ X used to do these hip hop shows called Live at the Barbecue, and it was at the Rivoli. But just soon after that, I was playing with a company called Nonchalant, which was a company that would play all of like Spectrum, Copa. It was more of like I don't know if you remember the station WBLK.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So our whole thing was playing what they played on BLK. If it wasn't on BLK, we weren't playing it. So in a night you would hear, like, we would do sets, so we would play the whole night, and you'd get hip hop, R&B, reggae, slow jams, house music, and it was the biggest of all of the the genres.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was my start. And the first rave I actually threw was with Daryl Dark and Tony Blue from Nonchalant.
Okay.
Because the rave started to creep in, and they were like, "What are you up to? What are you doing?" And this was like in 1992 was when we first threw our first rave.
And right. Yeah. A lot of the stuff that you said there kind of resonated, with the stuff at RPM and, all ages events. When I was about 15, 14, 15, those are the things, this is in like 92, 93, starting to discover stuff like that. But yeah, those late night live to airs, and we'll get to some radio stuff in a little bit as well. To me, that's what opened a lot of the doors. This has come up. I talked to Scott Turner on the podcast, who was at CFNY, then went to Energy 108 with Don Burns and all that kind of stuff. I've always been interested. That's why I wanted to talk to you of the people who had a part in radio, but also that were DJing and in the electronic music scene too. You mentioned 92. That's the first Delirium party then?
Well, it was pre-Delirium actually. Technically it was, because it was the same people, right? We called it at the time, X-Rave, okay. And the party was called Lost in the Jungle. So we were already deeply kind of embracing all of the stuff that it was basically, because there was the hardcore rave sound, right, with break beats and stuff.
Yeah.
But at the time, there was tons of stuff coming out with reggae in it, dub. So we were like, oh, this is techno.
This is our sound, yeah.
Everything is techno, hip hop, reggae, all in one, and that was exciting. It was really exciting. All the early hardcore stuff on like XL and Tribal Bass, which was Congo Natty.
Yeah.
And we were super into that stuff. So
I would say XL is like Sweet Harmony is like one of those just like anthemic tunes from that era.
Full on. And then Prodigy launched off of there, and I mean they had a great collection of early hardcore stuff. Then there was like Lobelo Blanco, who had a great collection of early hardcore. Ibiza, which was like a Delirium staple, like if it wasn't for Ibiza, and then Reinforced Records, which is probably our biggest influence.
Yeah, Reinforced. that catalog is bulletproof. It just is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. By the time '92 came and Reinforce was doing their thing, like it was always a lot more sophisticated, and the mix downs were incredible, and just pushing the genre further and further. But it had everything we loved, you know. So because the thing is, it wasn't just myself. I think reason why early rave launched in Toronto was because at the time dance music was hip hop and reggae. Like when kids pulled up to a rave, they were playing like Shabba Ranks and Tribe Called Quest.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
it was a
that was
different
us. I was
time.
like a kid from the suburbs in Scarborough that's like in high school,
100%.
all
Yeah.
over that. Yeah. And that was the music that got played at house parties, was house hip hop reggae.
Exactly. You know, they were listening to Ice Cube and
Yep.
Public Enemy
Yep.
and so it was a special time. So that influence of all of that hip hop and reggae, uh, married to the energy of rave music, you know, because at the time there wasn't any cheesy top 40 EDM, or it didn't exist. So kids were
Yeah.
really, they were listening to really good underground black music, you know, and it was awesome, and it merged with rave, and it just exploded from there. I think you know.
There was something special that happened at that time. It's interesting in '92 that you had a party called Lost in the Jungle. I didn't think that like jungle started, because at first it was just hardcore and breakbeat, and then like if I like maybe like late '92, '93, people would start calling it jungle techno, mostly because of what's the one, the Back to Basics, the blood clot jungle techno,
Yeah.
the way, you know.
Yeah.
Bad boys in the house. Are you really ready for some blood clot jungle techno? Are you ready for some blood clot jungle techno? Alright, time to get some jungle in the build.
So in '92 though, that you guys called that's
Full
such an
on,
interesting area. That's why there's so much evolution at that time.
Yeah, like I mean, here's the thing. Like, so we gravitated toward that word, and also too, there was a track called "Lost in the Jungle" by Potential Bad Boy on Ibiza Records,
Yes.
and so that's where that name came from.
Feel the rhythm. Feel the rhythm. Feel the rhythm.
At that point, we were already calling it jungle because we were like, you distinguish, like, you know, you heard all the stuff from Rank Records and Labello Blanco, and so what we were looking at, we were like, okay, all of this stuff with the heavy reggae influence and sound system influence is jungle to us. So we were like, this is what we're gonna call it, you know, whether or not they were calling it that anywhere else. But yeah, definitely, and even the jungle techno stuff, like what we were calling jungle techno, any of the techno kind of stuff with reggae samples, because there was
Yeah.
a bleep sound before the breaks came in, and
Yeah, like what the Warp Records stuff.
yeah, the Warp Records stuff, and
Yeah.
and there was, you know, so the sound system guys in England, the reggae guys started getting into the techno, right? Because techno and reggae actually have a lot in common, you know.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like,
Yeah,
and especially in the UK, there's always been such a strong, like for decades,
yeah,
even before the '90s, there's a strong influence on British culture from Jamaican culture. You know,
exactly.
like it made its way into like with the Specials and into the Clash and all that kind of music, and
Yeah.
and then the '90s and drum and bass come along, and then it just it takes it to a whole other level through that.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of the guys who got into the rave scene, they came in during the acid house period. So a lot of these guys, because reggae sound system culture was huge, there were like thousands of sound systems in all over England. And in England's, it's a big place, you know, whether it was Birmingham or Leeds, and Leeds had a special sound. They were a lot of the Warp Record stuff.
Yeah.
Mark Iration, who was making some of this bleep stuff, he's now one of the biggest sound system operators. He runs Iration Steppas, and they do full on dub reggae. You know,
Okay.
they run festivals, they throw nights, like, and he was part of that whole movement. You know, L Double was part of Unique 3. So it was like all of these reggae guys were like, I like this techno stuff. I like it. They were like, we're gonna put some beeline in this, we're
Yeah.
gonna put some bass line in it, and
Yeah.
that's what started happening. Like you started getting records like LFO where everything was just like the bass line was up here. Right. And so that's where everything started to kind of get married together, and if for us, we were growing up listening to hip hop and reggae. So that's what pulled us into it. We were like, oh, this sounds like the future.
Yes.
And he's got these heavy bass lines. And so it just kept, every week new records come out and it'd be a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more until like in 94 was full on Raga Jungle.
Yeah, it exploded in Toronto at that time for sure. LFO is one of those tunes though too that like in that breakdown like true sub bass that just like really hits you in the chest. I think that's one of the first tunes that I ever noticed that with,
Yeah.
Which is cool. Okay, so Delirium first parties are in 93 then?
No, the first one was December 92. And then the next one we had was called Smile, and that was in, I believe it was January 93. And we had loads of parties in 93. We were super, super active. I think, and also too, I would say like with Lost in the Jungle, there was Psychosis, but Psychosis would still have like a mixed genre. With Lost in the Jungle, we were focused on, every DJ was pretty much playing jungle techno, hardcore and jungle. Like it was like, that was our focus,
yes.
Especially for Delirium, we wanted to be a jungle company, and also too, at the time, our friends, because we had just finished playing house ourselves. So guys like that I grew up with, like Kenny Glasgow and Cube, and we used to have Peter, Tyrone, and Shams in the side room.
Yeah.
So because at the time we were listening to we were going to warehouse parties and listening to a lot of soulful house music, because that was the sound for Toronto. I don't think that the acid house thing never really caught on here. As much as we did have those records, it didn't become a movement.
Like house music was.
Yeah, they would get thrown into, sets at warehouse parties, but not like how it was in England where they were playing like whole nights of acid house.
Yeah, people were there for like the Whistle Song by Frankie Knuckles more than...
Yes. Yeah, more than like Washing Machine and all this like really hard,
Yes.
But I love that stuff. You know what I mean? And even now, like they look back and Can You Feel It by is an anthem.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So, but it was sprinkled in, but we really gravitated toward the harder edges, like and that was the beginning of rave because, the soulful house scene was great, but it was mellow. It wasn't driving. It wasn't more like you go out to rave. It was like you go out and you groove and enjoy yourself. It was a nice night. It was a little more mature. People would dress up.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a documentary that's been on YouTube for a while that shows I think it's some stuff filmed probably around 23 Hop, 318 Richmond Street. And I'm pretty sure you're DJing in there, and I think you're playing house. You might even have like a cameo. And
you know what? Actually, it's really funny. That documentary, they put a soundtrack in the background, and I wasn't playing house in that. So that little clip,
it's a short clip, and it took me a second. I'm like, oh, that's Marcus. Like
yeah. It was from the Psychosis mix-off. They had a DJ competition.
Okay.
I came second. I lost to Roughneck.
Okay. Well,
he played "Follow Me, Come Go Downtown," which I didn't have. It was the biggest tune of the time. So he literally just played that and it was over. It was like I got locked off with one tune. that's how Cautious is. He didn't even mix it or anything. He just played it.
Just played it.
And it was, that was the tune of the time, So, but it was great. That was the thing that introduced me to the rave scene, because I wasn't playing at Psychosis and Chemistry and these parties, right? That was like Dr. No, Roughneck, Jungle PhD, Mark
Hard
Oliver.
Crew, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to see those guys. And then, I started my company Delirium, and I started booking them to come and play. And we created, like, we even called it the Roughneck Crew, because Roughneck was like a pivotal guy at the time,
For
and
sure.
That word was a big thing because of that Ace track, Roughneck,
Yeah. I see there's the Facebook group, like I raved in Toronto between 91 and 2003. And there's a couple posts that I've seen in there where other DJs, DJ Lush, Frankie Guns mentioning about Roughneck Jungle PhD being, the foundation of that sound.
Yeah. Like, when I used to go to Psychosis regularly, which was at 318 Richmond.
Yep.
Big shout out to Ben and all the boys. So they would have, like, so once again, Soulful House in the side room, guys like Andy Roberts and Terrence would be in there, Danny Henry. And then the main room was Mark Oliver, Dr. No, Roughneck, Jungle PhD. Sometimes they'd have guests. They might have like Alex London pass through or something like that. But Psychosis was pitch black, amazing sound system. And, funny enough, as infamous as those parties were, sometimes it was just 20 of us.
Yeah. I think the first kind of events that I ever went to was the Freak Show, which was Friday night, where they'd have like a mix of electronic music DJs on one side, but then it was like industrial and like goth and stuff on the other side. It was a weird mix of a bunch of freaks at the same time, but it was cool, like I went down there and that was like nothing I'd ever seen before. Compared to going to like the RPM for Chris Shepherd, like there's a big difference between those two kind of vibes.
They were trying to find their niche, and at the time in Toronto, I was like, I think, I've heard stories that, they were having a difficulty with some of the audience that they were getting. So they wanted to try new things, and the whole rave thing was one of the things that they were trying, and they were like sort of at the forefront of it. Definitely musically, like that's where I heard a lot of my favorite hardcore for the first time. Like Dr. No is probably like my biggest influence, when it comes to like DJing and presentation. I learned all of that from him, even listening to his guest spots on Malik X's show on Radio London.
Yeah.
Malik was one of my biggest first influences that made me say, I want to do radio.
Okay. That's cool.
So, yeah. He had a show called Radio London on 88.1. CKLN, which is Ryerson, right?
Yep.
And eventually we started the Prophecy on Ryerson Radio.
Oh, okay. Before it went over to CIUT.
Before it went to CIUT, yeah.
What year did that start then? If you're doing like 93 was really active with Delirium, when does Prophecy kick off?
Well, we would start doing guest shows on CKLN because you had to kind of cut your teeth to get in at the time. So I think we started doing guest shows at like end of 93. But by 94, we had our show on CKLN, and one of the listeners basically knew someone at CIUT, and they phoned in once, and they were like, "Why are you on CKLN?" Because CKLN actually has a really small signal. So with 89.5, they were like, "Listen, you could go Barrie to Buffalo, Kitchener to Coburg."
Yeah, big.
And so we were like, "Okay," He's like, "I know the station manager. You can go in and interview." So I think we did like a year and a half over at 94, 88.1. And then I went and I met with the station manager, and they let us have a show. And as it turns out, they let us have a show right after Hard Jive, which was hosted by James St. Bass.
Yes.
And he was like one of our idols, because he was playing a lot of early rave stuff and he would have Jungle PhD on his show, you know. So we for years he would do his show before us, you know.
Yeah, I feel like James St. Bass and Denise Benson were really key, kind of, doing things in clubs and on the, community radio and stuff like that. That was the outlet back then. That was where, how many mixtapes have been made from, the Rinse Out show or from the Prophecy.
Yeah.
They get traded around. I mean, I remember there's certain shows that I've just listened to over and over. You mentioned Dr. No there for a second. I want to go back to him. And he just had a great presence. There was a real difference in MCing, and there used to be MCs for techno and kind of over everything, just kind of figuring it out. And drum and bass took it and went forward, in completely different ways. But he just had such a presence of, doing the shout outs and getting a crowd hyped, and just the tone of his voice. I don't know. There was something about that guy that was just like magical.
Super talented. I mean, yeah. He was a little bit infamous as well, especially near the end, like whether or not he would show up to a gig or not,
Dr. No Show.
Yeah, he was really in demand, but I think he presented the music very much like how a lot of people presented it in London. And you could tell that he had a sound system background, like he had like the reggae inflection in his voice, and he always had like that little bit of a reggae style to his presentation, and it didn't hurt that he was super popular with the ladies. He was a model at one point. Yeah.
Okay.
And he had a lot of swag. I mean, he's the only guy that I've seen pull off a silver spacesuit.
Right. Yeah.
He showed up to chemistry in a silver spacesuit, and everyone was just blown away because he's super tall. The ladies loved him. Got all the guys looked up to him. He was mammoth in our scene at the time, and his presentation and way of talking. Everything like saying touching down on da da da. We learned all of that from watching Dr. No and Malik X, who he worked with a lot. They both were English expats, and they brought that whole pirate radio sound to Toronto, and a lot of people give them credit for saying like, I don't think things would be the way they are now without them. The first time I heard, Shut Up and Dance and early raga techno, which we were talking about, that bleep sound. This is before Jungle.
Yeah.
Malik used to play records that, there was techno with a little reggae in it, and he'd call it raga techno. And it really inspiring to me because I was like, this is from outer space. This is amazing. Because like, obviously we were getting Detroit techno because it's like 4 hours away. So we were getting all the Detroit techno, Kevin Saunderson and all these things, Derek May. And these guys started playing this English techno, but it had reggae in it. We were like, we were really big reggae fans. Like, I was playing dancehall and reggae in every set because that's just how it was back then. You had to play everything. It wasn't just one thing. You played dance music, So if it was good dance music, you're playing Robin S, but you're also playing Shabba Ranks.
That's 100%. Like when I first started like DJing and learning to mix with friends, like that's what was in the crate. Exactly what you just described. Yeah. But having like the crate of 45s, when it starts to get into 94 and like you're hearing, like Shabba Ranks and Cuddy Ranks and songs, like you're hearing these familiar reggae songs now mixed, like to me, that's the same thing that you just said. It's just like these worlds colliding. It's like, oh my God, how does this even exist? It's amazing. It's like such a wonderful discovery,
I'm telling you. And it did, a lot of people say now it's like we're just regurgitating because we've done everything, and the 90s, I think when people look back in history, they're going to recognize how actually like just how powerful it is. Because even now, even if you look at hip hop, now that they've kind of run through the trap sound, what you see happening is a lot of the trap producers have sort of adopted this old 90s way of producing now. So now you're getting that Premiere, Pete Rock, Ninth Wonder sampling techniques with trap beats. It's so because the trap thing kind of ran its course because it was like a little 3-note synth and all the beats sound the same
Yeah.
You can only do that for so long. And so watching these producers, you know, really find out about like the production behind Nas and Tribe Called Quest, because that's really what's happening. They're sampling like Gladys Knight and Bob James and all these like big rare groove soul records.
Yeah.
It's amazing, you know. So
I love that sound, like the jazzy side of hip hop that Tribe Called Quest does. Like to me, that is a timeless sound.
boom bap, right?
I don't get that from trap. I don't get that feeling. I don't get that soulful feeling there.
Yeah, like I mean, I've been hearing some good stuff like now that's marrying the two, because I love fusion. Fusion for me is like, that's first you had jazz and then you had jazz funk, and
Yeah.
what was better? It was jazz funk for me. It was amazing because it was just like more rhythmic and a little bit more fun, a little bit more, dancey. And so I love when you can take something that we've all been listening to, just for example, like reggae, you throw some breakbeats on it, you're adding some techno, some pads, and all of a sudden you've got this thing that sounds like it's from another world.
Yeah.
And you're just like, and then you don't even like the original anymore. You're like, I remember we used to get
it doesn't have
records,
enough thump to it after you go back to
and we're like, people would say that to me all the time, especially like you'd be at a rave and a raver would come up and they'd just be like, I heard the original, the jungle version's way better.
It's true though, it just is.
Yeah.
But you've always kind of like that. Like I remember even like once well into it, like you had a phase where you were playing gigs and you were playing Speed Garage too. I remember that.
Yeah, because well, when the jungle thing, so in England, because of like the drug dealers and the gangs and whatnot, and I mean they have a population that's just massive.
Yeah.
So like when their raves were exploding, they were filling stadiums, and a lot of bad elements came into the music through gangs, and drugs obviously a very big part of rave culture. And so where there's drugs, there's money. Where there's money, there's gangsters. And then gangsters and police, and there's this little bit of a war. And so the music ends up being caught in the middle,
Yeah.
And a lot of bad things started happening at jungle events. And so they had to, a lot of the producers in the jungle community got together and said, you know what, we can't get a venue if we say we're playing jungle. And, if we don't do something about this, this is it. It's done. It's a wrap. So what they decided to do was, even in 94, 95, a lot of people were calling the music drum and bass, like an instrumental aspect of it. That word was always floating around.
Yeah.
And even in dub reggae music, you'll get like an instrumental version. They used to call it the drum and bass, the drum and bass version. So they adopted that, and they were like, we're going to call this drum and bass because we need this thing to survive. And a lot of the original junglist producers, they weren't pleased because they loved jungle. They were junglists, and the recipe really was, the rare groove soul samples, the raga, the break beats, and the little bit of techno. That was jungle, right? And what happened near the end of 95, they started saying, there would even be clubs where it's like, you can't play raga. You can't play no rare groove samples, no soul samples. So they stripped the music, which has never really happened. Like everyone sort of went along with it. Like, dancehall and reggae didn't change because there's violence at parties.
No.
So this was like a really interesting thing. So what happened as they started to strip away those elements, like the reggae and the dancehall and the soul, the UK garage scene was coming up. And so in like 94, 95, the UK garage scene, they were playing like US garage, but fast.
Yeah.
They were pitching it up. And, everything they do in England has a sound system appeal, because a lot of the DJs, they used to play in sound systems. It's like, or their dad played in sound systems. So they were hosting the music the same way on the mic as they did when they were in reggae, right? And then they started making their own records, right away. Once again, what do the English do? Make the bass heavier. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the junglists, a lot of the jungle producers were just like, I'm going over to garage because there's girls over there.
There's that too, right? There's absolutely that element.
And it's safe and it's fun, and it's the same fun vibe. And I remember having a chat with Shy FX, I think it was like in 1996. '97, and it was in '97 because the garage was really hit at that point. It really blew up with that double 99 track, Rip Groove,
Hmm.
which basically had Top Cat sample in it and a dread bass. And they have carnival every year in the UK, and literally everyone said didn't matter what tent you went to, all you heard was Rip Groove. Right?
Yeah.
Because and I mean they had the looping sample just the way they would in Jungle. They had Top Cat doing his like little thing in there, his special quest line or whatever, and
Yeah.
then they had a dread bass. So it was basically Jungle House.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's what it was. That's a good
Yeah.
description.
You know,
that
but
bouncy kind of dread bass sound to it.
yeah, and so as this sound, Rip Groove was sort of like the template for that sound, because that was the sound that sort of blew UK garage up. So they once again, you know, it inspires people. They're like, oh, I'm gonna make reggae with a jungle bass line over the top of house beats, and you ended up just getting loads of it, and so it attracted all of the people who loved everything about jungle because it had that same energy. And to be fair, almost all of the MCs were jungle MCs who came over. Like, so they had a mirror scene. You know, like you had MC Creed and, you know, Sharky and all these different MCs, right? And they're hosting exactly the way they would jungle, double time lyrics, dropping bass line after bass line. And don't get me wrong, when Garage first hit, I was quite sad about it, you know, because I was like, okay, well, jungle's definitely not coming back, you know, like, because when I was buying drum and bass, I was always looking for jungle influenced drum and bass because I
Mhm.
love jungle, you know. I'm a Junglist was pretty much one of the last songs, and the irony of that song is Rebel MC made it, and he was talking about I see your wicked plan. I'm a Junglist
Yeah,
because
yeah.
they were ending jungle to, you know, kick drum and bass off, you know.
But I know, now I understand. Now I see your wicked plan. I'm a junglist. Don't try to change my plan. Understand. Why won't you understand? I'm a junglist.
Interesting.
Not a lot of people, you know, there's a lot of argument about that. Like, there was a few famous, there's a big meeting on Cool FM with all the guys like Bull D and the Ragged Twins and a few of the DJs discussing, you know, the future of the music, you know, because it had a really, if it had a good long life, but, you know, it's sort of like, you know, from the hardcore period where it was just happy and then right through to like the end of 95, and then pretty much jump up started to come in, you
Yeah,
know.
96. A lot of hip hop samples started to come in 96 too.
Well, you know what's really funny about the hip hop samples was they replaced the ragga samples with the hip hop samples, and then eventually they were just like, okay, we got to change this too because this is literally now just hip hop samples with a ragga bass line and breaks. It's the same thing. So the same crowd was still kind of kicking around and being like, oh, I'm going to go to the jungle dance. It was the same thing. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you noticed, it was like there was a big wave of hip hop samples and then that ended. And so I think the thing that really, that the dark side came in
Yes.
after that
Yeah.
because they were like, literally, we need to dark out the music, get rid of this whole element, you know. And so the whole element really was that you know, the reggae soul lovers, they went to garage, right?
Yeah.
And UK garage exploded. Like, I went to London for the first time in '97. You know, I was one of the later guys. Like other guys, like Pat was going over there regularly before that. You know, in '94 and that. But I went in '97, and I was expected to go and like really absorb drum and bass. You know, I went down to Movement, at Bar Rumba, and I saw like
Yeah.
the V Full Cycle guys doing their thing. Brian G, Frost, Die, everybody, and I was going to Bar Rumba, but everywhere you went was UK garage. Like you went into McDonald's, you hear Pirate Radio playing UK, and so the buzz and the thing I remember about that trip was UK garage. Like I went to Coliseum, which is where they would have like a lot of UK garage raves, and the funny thing about it was at these raves, it was like I was like, wow, this is the jungle vibe. This is what I remember about jungle. All the energy.
Yeah, that 93 to 95 feeling.
Yeah, they're calling for rewinds. Like the first time I went, I heard like, you know, that song by Craig David, Rewind.
Yeah.
Rewind. When the crowd say ball, selector. Rewind. When the crowd say ball, selector. Rewind. When the crowd say ball, selector.
And Boo by Miss Dynamite, like that was just tearing down the place. Like, and you know, Wookie had, you know, Little Man and all these tunes, and just demolishing the place. Like amazing. Like, and it was the same thing. Like, so that we over here we started doing a company called Flirt, and I did it with Cecily, and
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So the guy Tony, who was just our promoter, Tony Mataru.
Yeah.
We were doing it. We were doing nights at Mad Bar, and then NASA Dance Pub.
Right. NASA that was a cool venue. I like NASA was a good spot.
So we would do our night at NASA, and I'd go down to Milano's because Liquid Funk was happening over at Milano's, and you know, so at the time I was playing like the two scenes didn't really intersect. There was a few junglists who had, you know, once again same thing, but a few people who were like, I don't like dark drum and bass.
I had so a lot of our crew was like that, and that's around the time that I started playing too, was like really like 97, 98. And some, you know, like it's you know, it's too dark. It's like there's no soul to it anymore. Yeah. And
yes.
I find that Toronto held on to a real nostalgia for reggae too, that I've heard doesn't always exist in, you know, other places where the music is popular.
Yeah, by the time like the guys were coming in the late 90s, we were still playing all of that music. You know, we were mixing it with the, you know, you go to a dance in 99 in Toronto, you'll hear Worries in the Dance.
Yeah.
You'll hear, you know, Bonanza Kid, you know, all those songs you'll hear. And so labels like V, Full Cycle, Philly Blunt, Players, all the labels that were a little bit more jungle oriented, they did really well. Like we managed, I think a lot of the DJs too, myself, Mystical, Lush, we really made, because we came in through jungle. So we made it a real effort to keep that sound there. You know, so if we were playing like all of the golden era D&B, whether it was Titan or whatever, we were playing Clear Skies as well. We were playing like Drop Bear, or we were playing The One. So there was these really big jungle influenced tracks during the golden era D&B that kind of kept the whole thing grounded. And I don't even think drum and bass would be here today without that soulful music to kind of, you know,
to draw people into it. Yeah. I remember like a signature mix of yours, a Top Cat Over You Body with The One, Maybe Swift. Yeah. Like that was like, I hear that. It's like that's a Marcus like trademark mix right there.
Special dedication to the girl them we fine. And the girl is slim, I know them body look at. From your bro, now your body wind up where you got. And take it from the dap, but then the one top. Get with tell them over. You body junglist man, them a cry. The jump side water drop out, now we high. Over you body city bell, them a cry. The jump side water drop out, now we high. Girl a look good when everything shows in a best and suspender. And fancy old school chain round your neck. Ringing on your nose with a jive and the rake. When you whine and pose, when you are muggling your sexy clothes. Come on, launch you on the monster and rose. Oh, you look so good down the monster God knows. That's why Mr. Cat me have to tell them say, we tell them over. You body junglist men never cry. Cage and side water drop out, now we high. Over you body city men never cry. All of the girls girls them, when me say, from your body go then you down, say you fed. Push out your bumper, wine and go deep. Cavalan, Shera, Miss Gina, Margaret. One of them a come and them a shock out my head. When them use a Mr. Cat and DJ and the junglers. Girls them screaming, come and know them lament. And them band them a watch them and a loss of my head. That's why Mr. Cat me have to tell the girls. And when me tell them, me say, over you by the junglers, man, them a cry. Teacher say, water drop out, now we high. Over you by the city bell, them a cry. Kid job say, water drop out, now we I make a way, you get your money, you know when I like. Cry for your body 10 times multiply. From your body look good, then we have to apply. And if we not go get you wanna try, when I try. Cause you're looking so ready and you're looking so nice. Come down once we have to come back twice. I forget your body and we don't have no choice. That's why Mr. Kill me up and tell them say, we tell them over you body junglist man, them a cry. Teacher say water drop out, now we high. Over you body city bend, them a cry. Teacher say water drop out, now we. Wait the man, we are going with them gunshot there. Hold on. Special request to all the Bronx crew. Tell them it's a top cat pass and show. Anytime pass straight coming like curfew. Rhythm check.
Yeah. So I mean, we tried to played everything in a set, and that was always there. But to always keep the jungle element there, and I think that's why we're still here. Because come 2000 now, Total Science, who were drum and bass hardcore jungle guys, they sort of started bringing the jungle sound back with digital and Breakage and Loxy and Ink. They started to bring that hardcore jungle sound back, and we gravitated to that. So there was always, like, right from when jungle ended, there was always enough jungle that was still out there for us to kind of like hold on to it and kind of keep going. I think honestly, if it wasn't for like True Players and V and Full Cycle, I wouldn't be here. Like I would have 100%, because I can't play music that doesn't have soul.
Yeah.
I think the thing is, and I love Golden Era DMB. Listen, I was playing like some Bad Company and Fresh. Those guys had soul. Even the early Virus stuff, Ed Rush and Optical. Some of my favorite tunes like Watermelon.
Yes.
And Gas Mask. Those tracks, even though they were the early beginnings of Neuro, had soul. Super heavy soul.
I agree. Because that's when I was super active in buying lots of records, was that era. And I was really into that, Virus and, Ed Rush and Optical and Prototype too. Was a great label.
But there was a lot of copycat labels, smaller labels, especially during the tech period, I think, that didn't understand the whole element of sound system culture and sub bass. And I think hardcore was grounded in that. With the whether it's pianos or not, you're still hearing that heavy bass line.
Yeah.
And especially in the hardcore period, you'd have these piano tracks with like super heavy reggae bass lines.
Oh, yeah.
That was the sound of hardcore. It was this weird marriage of pianos and chipmunk vocals and and you're just like, that's the funk,
I've always said, try to keep yourself from moving when you hear breakbeat and piano together. It's impossible.
Exactly.
It's impossible.
And so that's always been like the sub bass was crucial. And I think what happened during part of the tech period, probably to the dismay of people like Ed Rush and Optical, was that the people that were aspiring to make drum and bass, they didn't quite get the sub bass part. So there was a lot of records that came out that just had modulating top end, and they were calling it neuro and really dark sounds. And I'd be at clubs because there was a lot of party companies that threw that sound, and I used to go play dark sets. They'd be like, "Can you play a dark set?" And I'd come in and just play my favorite golden era stuff, like the beginning and the Nine and
Yeah,
Titan and
yeah.
stuff. Yeah, and it would work. I was just like, okay, I'm gonna come in and play you what I think is the darkness,
Yeah.
And so I used to play those parties, but I would hear some of the other guys play, and it was like, and they used to tell me, they were like, I used to be into heavy metal and punk, and the stuff that they gravitated to, like the Black Sun Empire, and like was just like even like Panacea, and
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
super hard, like, and I couldn't take that stuff. Like sometimes I remember just sweating to get out of the room.
This is the dawn of a new era.
Now I'm just like, I'm done my set, and it was just like ear bleeding and everyone just going as hard as possible. And I understood why people liked it, because you know what, if you grew up on like speed metal and all these different types of punk and stuff like that,
Yeah, aggressive, fast guitar music. Yeah, Panacea
Yeah,
does fill that for sure.
Yeah.
I have a Panacea record that I always I'm like, this is like heavy metal jungle. And
yes.
there's something about it that I kind of dig. So to me, I think when you go dark, there's a warm dark, but then there's a cold dark too. And the warm dark to me is good. The
Right.
cold dark is kind of like that. You'll definitely get no girls on the dance floor ever.
Well, you know what? I think it, once again, it comes down to the sub bass. Like if some of the guys manage to figure out how to like put that sub in there, and it grounds the track, right? Because otherwise, if you take that sub bass out, it's just all you're getting is high end and mid range.
Yeah,
Right.
and it's busy. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember like at going to Turbo some nights, and downstairs in the basement, and it was echoey in there. So
Yeah.
if your
Mhm.
tracks didn't have a beeline in them to ground the song, it was just echoes and clattering, And so I always loved playing there, because I was like, okay, I'm gonna come in here and just like make this sound system hum, because I'm gonna, you guys are missing an entire frequency here. So I used to just think it to myself, and yeah, I mean, the sub is to me, a music without sub bass is just like, what's the point?
Well, yeah, that's if I even said like a comment on that page about the rave scene in Toronto, was that there is something special about going up to a warehouse where the windows are just like rattling to the point where it sounds like they're about to blow out.
Yeah.
Commissioner Street makes me
yeah.
think of stuff like that, where it just there's something about that time and place and all of the stuff and the music that just came together that was like lightning in a bottle. I know that there's some people say that it died after that, but music scenes evolve and change, and after a while every party's going to come to an end. But there was something in Toronto that like that 93 to 96 that was just it was a unique time and place.
Yeah, I mean, even for me, I would say it was like 91 to 96, and 96 was a little bit sad for me. And if you talk to somebody like Bailey, he thinks 96 was the best year ever, right? Because that's when like the whole metalhead sound, and they started to reform the music and kind of take it in that direction. Like metalheads is crucial in remolding drum and bass. And the great thing is, like, metalheads had their cast of characters. Like Dillinger was a jungle guy. Digital was a jungle guy. You had all these guys who came out of even Goldie to a point, with coming out of Reinforced and stuff like that. So they had their foot in that sound, but then they had Optical and all these other guys and pushing the limits. And it was this like really unique marriage. So the music was still there, but they were putting out everything. And I think they were really conscious of the fact that, what was happening in the scene in London, and how can we like progress this and grow the music so that it's not, it was never about just dance music for Goldie. So the dance music part of the scenes kind of had their own, because come 96, Jump Up, was really taking on a life of its own, like tracks like The Message and The Shy Effects and like The Wolf and then
Fire.
you had, yeah.
It's 9-6.
you had all the Full Cycle guys sort of like really coming with their jump up version of jungle. I give those guys a lot of credit. Like if you listen to like Full Cycle from '96, they kept the jungle flag going. Like they were just kind of
Yeah. I always like the early Dope Dragon stuff too.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
They were just like, they didn't change. They were like, okay, well, this is where we're gonna take it. And they stood their ground. And I love that because that's what kept me. I could relate to those guys. I was like, okay, I get it. And that's what kept me in the scene. I see a Philly Blunt behind you and even Dread, like Ray Keith, like they kept it going like that. The spirit of jungle is in all of that music, even in metalheads, you know what I mean? But I think that in order to keep things going, and they had to call it drum and bass, and they had to kind of, go that direction.
That's interesting because there's always it's a fun debate that comes up, the jungle versus drum and bass thing, and I think you just described it the best that I think anybody has. So thanks for that. The other thing, when did you start doing are you still doing the Kool FM show in London?
Yes. I just had, it's my 6th year. I finished. Yeah. And I've been doing it for 6 years. In November it was my 6-year anniversary. And I do it every Friday, once a month, just to keep it fresh for myself. And also too, because I'm spending most of my time in the studio. But yeah, I do it the first Friday of every month. I do the 11 to 1 on Kool, so it's pretty amazing. Their time,
yeah.
So it's 6 to 8. So Friday night people be in the car or whatever, getting ready to go to the rave, and they get to hear a set from me. So
that's awesome. That's really and Kool FM has been at like the forefront of pushing, underground electronic music since the I think 91 or 92 when they launched. Like that is a key station.
100%. I don't even know what things would be like, because at times, Kool is pivotal in like pushing jungle, even hardcore before the jungle scene. But the whole jungle thing wouldn't have been the same because they had everyone on the station. Anybody who was anybody, you had to be on Kool at one point, and they're the famous Super Sunday, So, big shout out to Eastman. He's the owner that runs it.
That's cool. To have done the Prophecy for so long, and then to have, because it's kind of amazing when I think about what you've done, is that if you just did the Prophecy, you would have a legacy for having done that. If you just did Delirium, you would have a legacy for having just done that, as a producer. And you're still continuing and doing all these things. It's it's an amazing career.
Thank you.
And you're still kind of killing it. So, congratulations. Like, it's awesome.
It's funny, like that, that spark right from the beginning, it's the same spark that keeps me here now, and doing that set the other night reminded me of all this great music and like this heritage. And also too, digging through the collection and seeing all these like really unsung heroes, like people who really they literally put their lives on the line to make all this music, and maybe even contributed half of their life to like building a label. And now you ask, where's this person? You don't even know where they are. And it's a little sad, like when you see those unsung heroes. But now a lot of the guys have come back into the fray, and especially the jungle scene, specifically jungle, not even drum and bass, is back now. There's a whole other jungle scene that's new, a lot of new artists, and they're pushing that original sound. So for me, during the pandemic, I'm like, you know what? I'm so happy that this sound is back. I'm going to be going deeper into that sound, 100%. Because like, for me, a lot of the new, especially jump up, like a lot of the new jump up stuff, it's just doesn't have enough there for me,
Yeah.
As popular as it is, and that's the sound. Like if you go to Bristol, all over England, most of the big raves, it's this like, that foghorn sound that everybody's talking about. The guys who dominate that sounds like Serum, Voltage, the Board on Road guys, and I love it. Don't get me wrong, but I still gravitate more towards jungle. It's that first love thing.
I agree with you. It's again, there's just something about that sound, that music. If you fell in love with it, I think it stays with you, forever. Kool FM, did they stream? We can listen to that show. I know you post some stuff too after the show is done. Where can people like get a hold of that on socials? Like where should you be tracked down for content?
So if you go to Mixcloud, all of my cool shows for the last 6 years are on my Mixcloud. Marcus Visionary on Mixcloud.
Amazing.
So,
thanks so much. This was like a good history lesson, which is exactly what I was hoping to get from you. So it may have been a year late, but I'm glad that we were able to finally connect. And I meant to pull this at the start, but here I had this.
Is that the Arrival in Dark? Oh, nice. Yeah. When we were like, I was telling Brad about this. It's like when you're learning how to produce, you're learning in public, So
Right.
I have a lot of like proud moments, but I have just as many, if not more, embarrassing, cringe-worthy moments. So
well, what do you think about this one then? Is this a good one?
You know what? Ironically, some people really love that record. But for me personally, no. Like, we were just learning. We were still learning.
I was gonna say that's pretty early days. Was that must be one of the first releases that you put out? I think, isn't it?
Yeah, it was one of the first releases. I think the first release we had was on Flex for L Double. He was pushing us because he was coming down here all the time, and we would hang out, and he was really encouraging us. And then once we had the Flex release, I started making more tracks, and obviously really good friends with Mystical and Sniper. So they were like, yo, do us a single, and we started making some music for them.
That's cool. All right, Marcus, thanks so much. Hopefully one day we'll get back into playing music in venues with people and all that kind of stuff. So I know it's tough, but at least the music is still there through the pandemic to get people through. So thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, I'll be streaming on Twitch again for Toronto Jungle for my birthday, March 20th.
March 20th. All right.
Yeah. So that's
pump
gonna
that
be
out with the podcast and get people to tune in. I look forward to it.
Extended all vinyl set.
There you go. I'm there. March 20th.
Yeah.